I used to bring down enemies with nothing more than a length of rope and silence. Now, I'm being fined by the HOA over a ceramic planter. Life's got a strange sense of humor. They see a man quietly trimming hedges and think he's just another retiree. What they don't see is what happens when that man gets pushed too far. Especially when you go after the one thing he'd sacrifice everything to protect. This isn't about a potted plant anymore. It's not a neighborhood spat. It's personal. And it all starts with a knock at the door. Stick around. You're listening to QA Stories. My name's David Peterson. And if you think retirement equals peace and quiet, you've clearly never lived in a suburban community governed by a power-drunk control freak. This is the story of how a peaceful home turned into hostile territory, and how I had to reach into a past I thought I'd buried. It started with small annoyances. But make no mistake, there was nothing small about what followed. Elena and I moved into the Willowbrook subdivision 3 years ago. Thought we'd found paradise. Neat streets, friendly neighbors, homes with character. Elena, my wife of 18 years, is an architect with an eye for beauty most people only see in magazines. Our backyard became her canvas: terraced flower beds, a custom fountain, ambient lighting that made it glow at dusk. I handled the grunt work, the dirt, the sweat, the endless trimming. Neighbors always complimented how sharp and tidy everything looked. What they didn't know, that discipline came from 20 years in the military, where neat lines and vigilance were sometimes the difference between living and dying. Then, 6 months ago, Richard Harrison became HOA president. That's when it all began. The last president was harmless, a retired schoolteacher who just wanted people to mow their lawns and not block driveways. But Richard? He showed up with swagger and a clipboard. Mid-50s, ex-military posture, sharp eyes. Something about him always rubbed me wrong. He walked like a man playing a role he didn't fully deserve. The first meeting? He laid out new guidelines like a dictator laying down law. Lawn height capped at 2.5 inches. Door paint had to be pre-approved. Even flower pot placement needed sign-off from Richard's self-appointed aesthetic review panel. It was absurd. At first, I laughed it off. Then the notices started. The first one came on a Tuesday. Violation: grass exceeds regulation height, $200 fine. Elena was livid, measured the lawn herself. At most, 3 inches. I paid it anyway, which annoyed her more than the violation. 2 weeks later, our door. Colored too vibrant for community palette. That same deep blue door had been there for years. Now, a $350 fine. Elena began documenting everything, camera in hand, notebook by her side. She noticed Carol Jenkins, Richard's new assistant, watching us from across the street, snapping photos. At all hours, then came the camera. Perched on a utility pole, pointed directly at our home. Elena called the utility company. They had no idea where it came from. That's when I stopped brushing it off. Someone had crossed a line. I started setting up my own surveillance, high-end gear disguised as typical home security. Wide angle, night vision, every angle of our house, and a few others, covered. One night, Elena caught me wiring a rig in the garage. She noticed a photo I thought I'd hidden. Me in desert fatigues. The sign behind me read, Special Forces Operations Base. She didn't ask about it, but she didn't need to. Her expression said enough. She was seeing someone she hadn't met before. Meanwhile, Richard kept watching me. Not with disdain, no, this was something else. Like he was trying to remember something. At the mailbox, he once asked, "You ever serve overseas?" I gave a vague shrug. His eyes narrowed. I saw Carol trailing me when I was in the yard. Her camera lingered on my arm, where the edge of an old tattoo sometimes peeked out from under my sleeve. A seal trident. Small, faded, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what it meant. Week 4, the fines hit $750. The crime? Excessive garden decor disrupting uniformity. Elena was done, and I wasn't far behind. But I knew this wasn't about fines. Richard was testing me, watching how I'd respond. He knew more than he let on, and I wasn't about to tip my hand. That night, I filed the letters into my old military foot locker. Elena sat watching me. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. She was right that she'd stood by me for almost 2 decades, never questioning the nightmares, the scars, the shadows I carried. But this? This wasn't just about me anymore. So what was Richard after? And why did he look at me like he'd seen me somewhere he shouldn't have? If you've ever had a run-in with a nightmare HOA president, drop a comment. I read them all, and trust me, they're wilder than fiction. I thought I left the war behind me, but it followed me home. And then came the escalation. Richard wasn't just enforcing petty rules. He was laying groundwork, setting the stage, planning something. Elena proved she had an investigative mind. She tracked the camera's wire straight to Carol's backyard shed, where she found a hidden DVR feeding off the pole. No permits, no authorization, full-on illegal surveillance. She also figured out Richard had studied my schedule, knew when I was home, when I wasn't, even when Elena worked remotely. It meant he'd gotten into my calendar somehow, which meant someone had access they shouldn't have. This wasn't HOA harassment anymore. This was targeted stalking. When she laid out the photos, notes, and timestamps across the kitchen table, I couldn't help but admire her precision. This isn't random, she said. He's setting something in motion. Then came Max and Jake. Richard called them HOA enforcement officers. Right. More like muscle. Built like bouncers. No neighborhood experience. Just arms, attitude, and dead eyes. We watched Richard pointing toward our house as he introduced them to Carol. 10-minute meeting. 3 glances in our direction. I'd seen that posture before. Not just intimidation. Coordination. That's when it got ugly. A wreath of dead flowers on our doorstep. Elena's car scratched, words etched into the paint I won't repeat. Trash dumped across our lawn. When Elena called the police, they shrugged. Probably local teens. No. This was tactical psychological warfare 101. Break the spirit, weaken the target, drive them out. But Elena was the one they underestimated. She was scared, but not broken. Just cautious. Alert. She started locking every door twice, backing into parking spots. She even asked me if we should move. That's when I saw red. The property damage didn't matter. The fear in Elena's voice did. And every time something happened, Richard was watching, eyes behind his curtain. The puppet master. But he made one mistake. He thought I'd forgotten who I was. I hadn't. And soon, neither would he. I made a call that Tuesday morning I should have made weeks earlier. I told my consulting firm I was sick, fed Elena a story about errands, and spent the day doing what I was trained for, the surveillance. I parked down the street and kept my eyes on Richard. What I discovered was worse than I expected. Richard wasn't acting alone. He was in contact with someone feeding him detailed information, my schedule, my routines, everything. Around noon, he met with a man I didn't recognize, nervous energy, expensive suit, eyes darting like he was expecting trouble. He handed Richard a thick folder. They sat in his car, talking for nearly an hour. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Their postures, the way they leaned in close, how the man kept glancing around. This wasn't HOA business. This was coordinated. Elena and I weren't just dealing with pettiness. We were being targeted. Deliberately. The actual attack came 2 days later, Thursday morning. I had a mandatory meeting downtown. Elena stayed back, working from home. She'd be alone for at least 4 hours. I should have canceled, should have trusted my gut, but the meeting was on the books for weeks and skipping it would have raised red flags. I kissed Elena goodbye and told her to call if anything felt off. As I pulled away, a familiar sense of unease tightened in my chest. I ignored it, and that was my mistake. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Elena. Carol and 2 guys here for emergency inspection. Says it's urgent. What do I do? I didn't finish reading before I was already flipping a U-turn. 20 minutes from downtown in morning traffic?